Do we hold stereotypes about men as fathers in our society? We'll take a closer look at this topic on Talking with Henrietta, coming up next. Hi, I'm Henrietta. Welcome to the show. Many people today think fathers have gotten a bad rap. In fact, President Obama used Father's Day 2 years ago to talk about the effect that the lack of fathers had on children. In a speech, he said children who grow up without a father are 5 times more likely to live in poverty and commit crime. They're 9 times more likely to drop out of school and 20 times more likely to end up in prison. He continued by saying that children who grow up without fathers are more likely to have behavioral problems or run away from home or become teenage parents themselves. Well, we'll talk about President Obama's remarks and look at the role of fathers today with my 2 guests who are fathers themselves. Bruce Collins is the father of 3 teenagers. He serves as a senior deputy probation officer for San Mateo County. He teaches part-time at San Francisco City College, and he is the chair of the Fatherhood Collaborative of San Mateo County. Hector Sanchez Flores is the father of 2 young children. He is the Director of Policy and Initiatives for the Latino National Fatherhood and Family Institute, and he is a former researcher at the University of California at San Francisco. Welcome to the show. Thank you very much for joining me. I also have with me several guests in our studio audience, and they will be invited during the show to also participate. Now, do you think fathers have a bad rap currently in society?
I think that fathers that struggle with their responsibilities have a bad rap. I think that fathers that are doing what they've learned to do, and they do very well, are sometimes captured in the shadow of that bad rap. But I think that oftentimes we always look to those that aren't doing what we expect them to do, and sometimes make it more broad. So in essence, yes, I think that fathers can have a bad rap.
Interesting.
Yeah, well, I kind of see it slightly different, because I think that the way society is changing the roles of fathers and the challenges they face today makes it kind of different. And I think it's important that the young kids have role models and have fathers around to make sure they have an example of what's really important: being around, being there, being involved, and setting the example that they can hopefully lead to their own children to follow.
Now, Bruce said the role of fathers is changing. Do you think the role is changing, and if so, how?
I think that the expectations when you're in a partnership are very different for fathers. I think that I was still of a generation where my father worked outside the home and my mother worked primarily in the home. That's not the way my family is structured now. We both contribute to the well-being of the family. So in order for there to be equitable, parenting, you have to assume roles that my father didn't have. Now, my father and mother worked rather well in that role. I think that there's a lot of people that had to adjust or have to adjust how they're going to parent and do things that perhaps they didn't see modeled in their home, but were willing to do it because they wanted it for their family.
Bruce, you're the one who said the roles are changing. So what did you have in mind?
Well, I think that, given what Hector said, he laid the foundation for it. Yes, the roles and the dynamics are totally different with everybody working, both parents working. So I think it's really important for the team, the parents as a team, to establish, even before having kids, what is our objective? What is our program? What are we going to do with our kids? How are we going to work it together? How are we going to administer discipline? How are we going to work to do homework and cook dinner and share these roles together? And at the same time, consult with one another to make sure that we're accomplishing the things that we want to do in this fast-moving pace world that we're living in now.
Now, you seem to say that you can sit down and you can plan it before the children come along. And my favorite expression is that life is what happens when you've made other plans. And you talk about it being fast moving. So it makes me think just how safe or secure are those plans?
But this is our responsibility as adults. This is when we talk about young people being prepared to have those dialogues, we prepare them so that they do this with their partners and who they choose to be with. We don't train young men to be fathers early on. I use this adage that oftentimes you work, or if you're in the presence of young girls, you can ask them the blanket question, what will your family look like? And they will have this vivid image of, I'm going to have 2 children, the first one's going to be a boy, I'm going to have 3, it's going to be 2 girls and a boy, and they'll have names. They have very vivid images of what that's going to look like. Ask a boy that's of similar age, and they will oftentimes look at you very blankly. And that's our responsibility to begin to say, what kind of family do you want to create? What kind of family do you want to be a part of? So that those discussions become a natural course of that.
How much control do we actually have over all of that?
I think you have a lot of control. I mean, from my own personal experience, that's what me and my wife did. I was adamant. I was the only child. I said, baby, why don't we have 5 kids? You're one of 5, your mother's one of 5, my mother one of 5. Let's have 5. She said, no way. Not unless you had the last 2 in the pregnancy. But I said, okay, how many pregnancies are you willing to go through? Because that's important. And when she said 3, we ended up with 3 kids. She asked me a question. She said, well, what order would you want? I said, well, I want 2 boys and then a girl. And she goes, why not boy, girl, or girl, boy? I said, I want 2 boys that I can raise to be the type of men that their sisters should marry. And that's all planning. And now I have an outline, and we have a plan and a program that we're trying to follow. Do we have to be flexible and change? Yes. But
one question, did you have 2 boys and then a girl?
I have 2 boys and a girl, and all 2 years apart. So far, the plan is working.
Congratulations.
But we're constantly adjusting.
Yeah.
I would think so.
But, the same thing holds true. I had a discussion with my son. When he was very little, he would tell us he wanted 100 children, 50 boys and 50 girls. And that told you how big his heart was, that he felt he could do that.
Did that tell you the influence of his father? Did he hear his father talking about planning? Or
I think it is a part of it, even at a very young age. What is it which direction do you want to go? And then soon he shifted and he said it's going to be 50 boys and 50 children, 25 boys and 25 girls. One thing never changed, that his oldest son was named Jim. And then when he soon started, I think it was in 2nd grade, he said to me, he says, Dad, I think 50 kids is a lot of mouths to feed. And he said, I want to have 4, 2 boys and 2 girls. And I said to him, Diego, that is incredible. I said, that's what your grandparents, this is my mother and father, that's what we had. There were 4 of us, 2 boys and 2 girls. I said, you're following in your grandfather's footsteps. And he said, why didn't you? And I said, I would have liked that, Diego, but your mom and I decided something different. And he said to me, and this was part of, his little understanding of this, was like, well, why didn't you get what you wanted? And I said, I loved her that much. And, he was taken aback. And I said, now when you go to college, son, you're going to have to find and meet people that share that kind of family dynamic. And he said to me, I said, because some people don't want to have children. And he looked at me rather stunned. I said, this is part of you discovering your way in life.
And learning that's okay.
That's okay.
Some people don't want to have children.
No, you started talking about the difference between boys and girls when it comes to families and the concept of families. Do you think there is a difference in the thinking between boys and girls, or young men and young women, when it comes to having families?
Well, it's interesting you said, Henrietta, because I remember telling my wife before we had kids all the things I were going to do with those 2 boys. And then she threw a curve at me and said, well, what about the girl?
Yeah.
And I went, oh, I didn't quite think of that. Yeah. And so I said, you know what, I'm going to get back to you on that. It's funny, I talk more with my daughter about sports than I do my 2 sons. I spend a lot of time now engaging a lot of dialogue with my daughter about the respecting of womanhood, about how she carries herself, how she has to look. And I tell her this stuff because this is my perception of women. And I want you to carry yourself with the grace that I think all women should. So as your father, I really try to impart that on you. Your best example is watch your mother. That's what attracted me to her. So yeah, it is some things different, because at the same time, the best thing I ever heard hearing my kids grow up was when my two boys said, you know, you have to respect women. And I was like, where'd you get that from? They said, from you, Dad. Yeah. So they're constantly watching you. Wanting to have 50 kids, that's because he's in an environment that really is highlighting the joy of family. And he wants to expand on that. And I think that's when you're really doing your job unconsciously, not even recognizing the results, when your kids want to duplicate it.
And I'll add this. I said, you know, I have one of each. I want the same exact outcome from each of my children. I want them to be happy and content with where the direction that their life is going. I want them to nurture and develop their positive gifts and talents. I want them both to make positive contributions to their community. That's not any different because one's a boy and one's a girl. I think that as they grow up, they're going to encounter, society may begin to influence those things. My job is to create the strength so that they can drive and succeed. And, you know, I can't prepare them for the world that I live in. I'm preparing them for the world that they're going to live in, and how that's going to evolve. I'm not quite sure, but they're going to, I hope to prepare them well for that.
Let's go back.
Characteristics that will transcend.
Yes, yes.
Let's go back to something you said when you knew of a young woman and you talked to her and she said this is what she wanted in terms of her family. And the young man looked blank.
Yes.
And so
I think that somehow or other we transmit something to girls, or they learn something, you know, from what they observe. And if boys don't see men thinking about, you know, the way you describe these dialogues and these discussions, then they think that life happens to them.
it does, doesn't it?
It can. It can. To some extent, life will always do that to us. But there's also something that there's a way to influence the direction and trajectory of it,
Right.
you know, and young men should recognize that when you are accounting for these kinds of things about relationships and family formations, you can actually reap incredible benefits from that.
Obviously, the two of you are exceptional fathers. Would you
No,
consider
no.
Well,
that-
you're not.
no.
No, you're not the average father. You're not the father that Obama was talking about. The fathers who, in all too many cases, aren't carrying out the responsibilities of fatherhood. So what has happened? If you are not exceptional, then who are you?
I know many men
Yes.
that are working very hard at their task of being both a partner, husband, a father, you know, all these things that they do. They just do it because it's what they do.
Yeah, it's their responsibility.
And-
One of the things that the Father Collaborative is about is acknowledging and promoting the efforts of fathers that are doing their jobs, because those are the ones that tend to get overlooked.
Yeah.
I think there's more men and fathers out there making positive impact, playing a vital, important role in kids' lives than there are men that are absent. The ones that are absent naturally get the publicity. But I think there's a lot of fathers that need to be commended for the job that they're doing in their home.
Yes, but when you look at those statistics,
Yes.
there are so many who are not assuming those responsibilities. How do you have the prisons, how do you have the president talking about those without fathers more likely to drop out of school, more likely to be in prison, more likely to commit crime?
Well, I think that what President Obama has begun to recognize is that we can't let resources lay dormant any
There's
longer.
the key.
And so if we have young people that are struggling to navigate their lives, then we need to, it's a call to action for those men who don't see themselves. I've known men, and that's why I believe collaboratives such as the Fatherhood Collaborative here is so valuable, is that they don't know how to correct it. They've made mistakes, and they feel that those mistakes are the way that their life is going to continue.
When you say they, you're talking about?
Fathers that have struggled, you know, we all make errors, you know. People will say to me, you know, Hector, you know, you have alluded to it. Well, you know, you're a good father. Well, I struggle with patience just like every other father does. I struggle with sometimes second guessing, well, could I have disciplined differently?
How old are your children?
My son is 8 and my daughter is 3. So Diego is 8 and Sofia is 3. And so, I think being honest with fathers about those kinds of realities, they're like, so you don't have it down? No, I don't. It's a day-to-day job.
On-the-job training, I call it.
I'm open to change, and, positive men tend to influence that change much easier. And so when you have a collaborative that is bringing together the men that are really working hard at doing right by their children, and you put them in the presence of those men who maybe haven't quite got there, it's easier to emulate something positive than it is something when you're just sitting around doing that. That's why I'm always stunned. People say, well, there's not a lot of fathers. I know a lot of them. And we talk about fathering.
Well, it's very interesting. What you seem to be saying is it's the fault of the media, that we have this image that there are all of these fathers out there who are not being fathers.
And see, that's where...
And yet, the number of single mothers raising children happens to be increasing.
Right. And that, the way I look at Obama's presentation is that there's different segments. And the way the collaborative approaches is that make sure you acknowledge those fathers that are doing their job. At the same time, identify those fathers that are absent and not doing their job. And how can we develop programs to get them to buy into one, this is your responsibility. Yeah, you made a mistake. You might be in prison, but you know what? You're going to get out. How are you going to reacclimate into that child's life? How are you going to absorb that role? How are you going to pick up that relationship now that it's down the road? You didn't get it at birth. Maybe you're coming in as a teenager. How do you establish that relationship? How do I help you have the self-esteem to even attack it? These are the different segments that I think that fatherhood is experiencing today. And we don't want to exclude anybody because our kids benefit when we make sure that we're addressing as many of the areas as we can. And we don't want fathers to think, well, because I went to prison, I can't be a dad. No, you made a bad mistake, but that child still needs you.
Is it a false image to think of women? You talked about the concept that this young woman had and the concept the young man had. And I would almost think that a lot of women would think of their family. And the man or the young man would think of not wanting to have the responsibility. And so you have more men or more young men abandoning their families because they don't want the responsibility.
I think young men can get overwhelmed with what they perceive is their responsibility. If we measure fatherhood and manhood strictly on how much money you can make and bring home, and that's your sole definition, then if you have no means of bringing home money, then that's where the value as a man and a father will be. But if you are telling fathers that you have a role on the nurturing side, on the guiding side, on the parenting side, that is very, very valuable. Actually, it may end up being more valuable than the other. The other one is important, but if that's how children will begin to see you in that role, I think that kind of reframe, saying that is equally as valuable, begins to tell all fathers, wow, the wealthy and the one that is struggling at the moment, to say, no, my role as a father is independent of the absolute amount of money that I have.
Yeah, because I would take it back to what you're saying about being young. It's okay for us to show young men that you can aspire and dream about how your family's going to be in the future, how many kids you want. Young men have to start hearing that. I call it the John Wayne mentality. It's okay to cry in front of people. It's okay to show emotion. It's okay for a young man to say, yeah, I want to have 3 kids and be married someday. We have to make it start at that level. And that way, as they grow up and they meet a young lady and want to have a family, they're bringing something to the table too. Yes, I want to have kids. This is how many I want to have, and this is how I want my family to be. And you need to start it. But if young men never even think about that, and they think being a man is, as Hector say, is how much money you make or how many babies you can produce and not take care of.
Well, it makes me think, what are the prevailing images that we have right now of men? What does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be a father? And living in America, you talk about a father's value being more than just how much money he makes. Is this an image that's prevailing in society where oh, if you don't have that much money, it's okay, or you need to have the newest car?
I think that prevailing image can be influenced just like everything else. My son looks to, whenever there's a picture of President Obama in the paper, or there's a headline, Diego knows he's a father. And, in discussions that we had, because it gets highlighted, so the image that my son has of the president of this country currently is that man is a president and he's a father of Sasha and Malia. My son has never met those two young ladies and will likely never meet him, but he understands that dimension of fatherhood is really important for him, for that man, for the president of the United States. That is the prevailing image that my son has right now. I have no doubt that as he matures and grows up, there will be other things that get interjected in there. However, right now, as a young boy, that's what it is. I think that you're right. I think that it's troubling sometimes to hear the things that go on and what fathers are highlighted. But that's the reality. I think that the media will continue to do its job to call our attention as they see fit, and it's our job in the home to kind of counterbalance that and say, that's media, that's entertainment, that's what they do. But look at these other dimensions that you see around you. And I shudder to think, how that's going to affect this boy's lifelong view of fatherhood. The most important person in the world values his role as a father.
The two of you had fathers.
Yes.
You grew up with fathers.
I didn't grow up with my father.
I did.
No, I see my father twice in my life.
What shaped your view?
Well, it's funny because not having a father, and that's what I get so excited about being part of the collaboratives, because I recognize that it's a lot of men influenced me besides my dad. I didn't have that image. When I was talking about getting married and receptive to getting married and having a family, I saw my situation as an opportunity. And the way I describe it to people is I had a blank canvas to design and paint the type of husband and father that I wanted to be, that was going to be effective in that family situation. And that's what I've taken advantage of. And I try to share it with my students and the kids in the neighborhood and anyone else that, you can't use the way you came up in life as an excuse. At some point, you have to take control of your destiny. And that's what I felt that I did. I reached out to my father. I tried to get a relationship going with him as an adult, but that wasn't the main objective. The objective was, Bruce, what are you going to do as a man?
But I would think, there is this idea that to love, you need to know what love is. You need to have been loved so that you can give love. You can't give what it is you don't have. So if people do not grow up with fathers or a man in their life, how then do they model what a father is or could be?
Mr. Collins says it best, that sometimes the absence of something can be the motivation to be looking for the best possible image. My father, I would love to end up being the type of father my father was. The courage to have come to a country where he didn't speak the language, he came from Mexico, to find a way to go back and marry a woman and come back and start a family here, to deal with the struggles of being raised in one culture and watching your children be bicultural, and manage it well, and have a myopic view of this home as a partnership between your mother and I, and seeing it mutually done. There was no power struggles because, that was a real frustrating thing, my siblings and I said, we could never divide them. And I would say
you couldn't play them
you
one
couldn't
against
play
the
them,
other.
and
and you tried.
We tried, yes.
That's your job, is to try as a
and
kid.
so, and so now I sit there and I watch, with these trials and tribulations of a 3-year-old and an 8-year-old, and you kind of go, well, how come I got suckered into this and my father didn't, and I think and so you correct and you move forward, but my father was was not a loud man, and people that, say, you really lend a lot of authority to your father. But people that knew him said he never commanded authority. And I said, no, I rarely heard my father raise his voice. But we knew where he stood, and we knew where the lines of demarcation were. And so you could inch close, but you better never cross.
Oh, that's interesting.
And there was the ultimate rule.
What happened if you crossed?
Well, this is what my father had my father had one prevailing rule. Is like, don't do anything that upsets your mother. And so
blame it on the mother.
And so when you got old enough and you make mistakes that you really did upset your mother, and then and your father would come in and my dad would sit with us, and he would say, you broke the cardinal rule. And I'd say, Dad, I know, but, and he says, no, you don't get it, son. You get to go to bed tonight, and you may have a slow time falling asleep, but you and your mother, we're going to be talking about this most of the night. Mm-hmm. He says, you're getting off easy, so you can't do these things. So, he didn't have a bunch of rules. He was basically saying, follow your moms.
And did you get a beating?
No, he didn't. No, it wasn't like that. Although it was always on the table, Henrietta. It was never, we don't believe in it.
It was always a threat.
It was always there as a tool. And sometimes it was used, and sometimes it wasn't. And I would say that when it was probably, deserved, at least on my part. I don't know about my siblings.
Well, in my home, it was my grandfather and my uncle. Talk to you. My grandfather never spanked, but my grandmother was the disciplinarian, and she would spank you. I mean, we feared when we got in trouble to have to deal with that lady, but she shaped our character.
Yeah.
And it was funny. I remember telling my kids, I said, yeah, it was about 10 years old, the spanking stops. And they were like, well, what happened, Dad? I said, first I thought she just got old. I said, but then I realized that she shifted her way of dealing with us. Yeah. She found out she got more out of us by talking to us. And one of the things she used to do was make us go to our room, and we thought the spanking was coming. She would come up and she ended up talking to us. And we were like, oh, okay, we're getting more out of this. We got in trouble less and tested those barriers a lot less because now we got to sit down and let her talk to us all night, So, yeah. But the strategy changed. But she was the disciplinarian. And it's funny because my kids, I don't spank my kids. I think I spanked my daughter once and my son once, the oldest, for lying. That's it. I don't accept lying. But in dealing with my kids, the two boys, they make fun of me. They said, Dad, you have all the looks, and we stopped doing things based on your looks. So one day we were working in the garage, and they had a game where they were showing me all the looks. And then they said, well, this is the one look. When you look like this, we look for a seat. Because we know that, hey, we've messed up royally when you do. I go, well, what's that look? And the joy just seeing their face and making this look. And I didn't realize I was doing that. But I don't yell. Because I truly believe when you raise your voice, you lose the child. And so I want to make sure that I'm getting my message across.
But you said something really important, because when you look back, we sometimes think of people being static, and your grandmother who used one tool and then developed a new tool. That kind of change is always possible. And that's why I think I like being around people like Bruce, who teach me about things that can be improved upon. And it's easier to do it with somebody who's being thoughtful about it. And there are times that, people that don't have the credentials, but have learned through trial and error how to improve what they do as a father. And, I learned a great deal from these men, and they never went through parenting classes like, I needed to probably when we were first starting out. But that's what, when you bring together people, when you bring together fathers, that's the product that happens. Even the fathers that are struggling the most have probably done things right at some point. And even the ones that have made big, serious mistakes oftentimes are really hard on themselves because of those mistakes. And if you bring together fathers that are there for the benefit of their family and their children, the community will benefit. And it's not about us. I don't get half as much out of what I do than I hope that I'm giving to my son. There's no tangible benefit, I think, than just simply watching them develop healthy, and then you see them do things and master things that they couldn't do 6 months before. That's the payoff.
I could sit here and go for more than this show, talking to the two of you. But we have several people out here, I'm sure, who might want to ask some questions or make some comments. And this would be a time if you would like to say something.
Yes, hi. My name is Aura. I'm sorry. My name is Aura Colbert Johnson. I have can you hear me?
Yes.
I have 5 grandchildren, and their father is incarcerated. And you mentioned that fathers can still be fathers once they get out of prison. But what if they will never get out of prison? 107 years is what my son was given. And my son, I was talking with my grandson, and I would like to share with you some of the things that he told me. He said, he's 13 years old, by the way. His name is Jean-Brie, and his father's name is Jean-Brie, and he is in prison for 107 years. Jean-Brie said, "Grandma, my mom is a great mom and role model, but she's a woman." He said, "I need my dad." And then he said that my dad is not around. My dad not being around is hard. The first time I went to visit my dad in prison, I didn't see the prison walls nor the bars. All that I saw was my dad, much thinner than the last time I saw him. I remember saying, "Hi, Dad," and I was pretty quiet. We hugged. I cried when my dad and mom set me down and told me that my dad is in prison for 107 years. Then he moved to Texas Friday the 20th, and he said, "Grandma, leaving my family and friends and stuff is hard. The hardest part is leaving my dad because I won't get to visit him that much." Then he stated that, "I believe that my dad will be coming home because I pray for him every day. I ask God to bring my dad home." Being a woman and being a grandmother, I don't know really what to tell him. All I could tell him, I looked at him in the eyes and I said, "Jean-Brie," I said, "I promise you," I said, "you have my word. I will help to bring your dad home." But he looked at me as if to say, "Grandma, I don't want to leave because it's like being disconnected from my dad by my moving to a different state." So being a grandmother and his being away from his uncles, he's left, all of the men that he knows, all of the male support. So what can his mom do and what can I do as a woman and as his grandmother to help him to become the type of man that he should become?
Well, that's a tall
powerful,
order for you.
Yeah,
Well,
it's extremely powerful.
Well, if you think it's powerful for us as men, I think of Jean-Brie at 13 and how he's intersecting with this. See, this young boy, that's growing to become a young man now, knows his father.
Yeah.
He knows his father. And it may not be ideal, and it may be very hard for him to comprehend how this happens, but the thing is that he knows who his father is. And that is the perfect example of where you build capacity with a father like Jean-Brie Sr. to say, you may feel disconnected because you're not physically present. However, it is clear that he is emotionally present in the heart of this boy. And so how can you begin to leverage that kind of capacity in the father to say, your circumstances are very well known. So what are you going to do to keep your son from not following in your footsteps and reaching his full potential? These are, that's the best place to start if you're talking. I think all men that are incarcerated, same as mothers, they remain parents. And oftentimes the physical disconnection, we think, well, they're sight, out of mind, out of sight, they're not doing it. But in the heart of the children,
they are there in the heart of the children, but there isn't that physical presence on a day-to-day basis.
And that's hard to compensate for. But in hearing the story, my mother's name was Aura, so it's a pleasure to meet you. In hearing the story, I hear more good in it than bad, like Hector was saying. First, I was delighted to hear that he wants to have his father be an important part of his life. That's very important. Two, and this is a huge hurdle, he was willing to go to a prison. Most kids are scared to even see the police, let alone to go see somewhere where people are incarcerated. But he was willing to climb that hurdle to see his father and connect with him. 3, his father obviously made a bigger impression on him where he wants to have him remain a part of his life. One of the things I would suggest is they share like a little mini book club, that he shares some books. Dad, I'm going to send you a book. You read the book and we can write about it. Dad can write to him. And one thing that Hector's great at is Dad can write to him and tell some of the stories about his life and his experiences and the family's history that he really enjoyed and want his son to relate to before he made the poor choices that got him incarcerated. And that way he's getting a chance to connect with his father from a positive standpoint. And then as his father tells him about, don't make the mistakes I made, it comes on the heel of make sure you enjoy all these things that I was able to enjoy.
And I would add one thing is that to get a father to recognize when our fathers are young and they make mistakes, their development is stunted, and they accelerate development to survive in the environment that they are. And if you're in the system of the prisons, you're very sophisticated in that one, and you kind of lose touch with what is needed on the outside. So building the capacity of that father to say, don't glorify that you have learned to function here. Think about what skills your son's going to need to survive on the outside and not end up here.
No, I would think if it's and I'd have to be very careful, so maybe I need to backtrack before I get started on this one. All too many cases, I would think, when you talk about gangs on the street, which is something that seems to be growing and ever present, the gangs, the people in the gangs glorify those who are in prison. And that's a place for them to go. So, and it seems that her grandson is most vulnerable.
Can be, yes.
He can be.
But he has.
But I hear a lot of strong characteristics that I think is going to prevent him from going in that direction. And I think there's a lot more positive than it is negative.
Depending on what?
Gangs, and what I see with gangs, it's funny. I tell my kids, I say, hey, we're a gang. I say, you know what our gang is called? Family. Most kids aspire and get attracted to gangs because there's something missing in that home. It's the parents not getting them to see you have an important role in this family. I tell all kids and parents, when a child is born, they're already given a God-given challenge, and that is to, 1, identify with your family's legacy, learn your family's history. 2, have goals in your life to aspire so you can eventually contribute to that family's legacy. And 3, if you have kids of your own, put that same challenge to them. That's how you continue the family's legacy.
I couldn't agree more. I will add that Jean Bray's circumstances are going to be a little bit more complex. But if we kind of think of the way it was done in the old days, generations ago, there was a role for everybody, because maybe it wasn't prisons, but parents, fathers died or mothers died, but there was a collective way of keeping everything in close to balance as possible and harmonious. The elders had a role. Chambray has elders in his family. Has a mother who's very committed to him, has the positive influence of a woman. I'm sure that there are positive men in that community that can be drawn upon as uncle and father figures and say, this is how you can do it. And then connecting him with his youth as well, not letting him grow up so quickly. Those are the old ways. We have stories and narratives in our families that go back to get over these circumstances. We sometimes have devalued them because we now can be trained to do things better. And the training builds capacity. But the old legacies of our family are very, very important. And if you didn't inherit a good one, then you have to still acknowledge it that you can move forward.
We'll talk about legacy in a minute, but I'm just wondering if there might be some more comments or questions.
Good segue, because I think historically we have to look at, I'm going to just talk about EPA solutions, East Palo Alto solutions. And certainly, historically, we need to look at how the role of mother and father came out of slavery, which is what we were brought here for. And so as it has evolved, the the challenges that our great-great-grandparents have. We still have those challenges in terms of males being hired by basically white power structures. So those structures are still in place. And so in terms of trying to fit in those structures is actually more difficult than it was actually in the old days. We have to look at, again, the media role and the family, the modern family. Work, and then when the kids come home, it's media, it's the internet, it's television. So when are we imparting our historical and our legacy, et cetera, to them? So we're having, I don't have much time, I know, but I want to just give some information so that people after this show can do it. Now, President...
Well, before you do that, Tiambe, let's get them to comment on what you just now said, and then we'll go back to you for the information.
Okay.
Do you have any comments in terms of...
I think that, yes, the media does have its influence, but I think the family has far more influence, and the community. And I see it all tied together. The way I describe it to my kids is, it starts in our home, what me and your mother is doing to make you feel part of our family. The day that you're old enough to walk out that door and represent this family, you have now become a part of the community. And the community is going to have influence on you. So I don't think the media has as much influence as the community, the families, the schools, the people that the kids interact with. The other thing is we have to make sure the kids understand. You're living in a time where the only barriers that you have, that you confront, are the ones you put on yourself. Education is your key. It opens up doors that you don't even know exist. Having good social skills, being able to get along and interact with anybody and assimilate in any environment is vital today. Your job may not be in Palo Alto. It might be out of this country. You better get trained to be able to assimilate into different environments. So we put new challenges to the kids, but we have to start young. And that, to me, dispels any of the things the media try to convey, because they're getting it from the people that love and care about them the most.
You know, I agree that's, Bruce, I believe that we do that to build capacity and a trajectory for young people. But what I heard you say also is that there's a historical legacy for young people and fathers and in certain communities that we can't ignore. Because you know what, they're going to confront that, you know, when they leave your community. And how you interact with that is you recognize the struggles and the shoulders that you stand on in order to be able to have the opportunities that Bruce described. Because there's going to be the day when you're going to say, is it me or is it really them? And you know, and am I just being paranoid, or is it really what I think it is? And you have to have a way of confronting that you're prepared to do that, to do that. You know, I've worked with young people, and they put a lot on that history, and they say, I'm not even going to try because of that history. And I say, you know, you have to recognize that that's not why you were put here. There have been people that have died so that you could work harder and earn those responsibilities.
I promised Tiambe I'd get back to her, but before I do, let me just follow up on something you said. Mm-hmm. You said we have the family, and when you leave this family, you go out to the community. There are all too many kids who do not have that family's background or structure. They're literally raising themselves. And so now, what do you say to them? I mean, those are the ones who are most vulnerable for the gangs. Those might be some who are homeless, who are out standing on the corners.
I think that's where the broader community has to, you know, young people that live under those circumstances should not be blamed because they're in those circumstances. And sometimes those circumstances are created because families are just working hard just to give them that much. So what does the community then do to say, we're going to alleviate some of this? If you are not in a good place, what kind of investments do we make so that these young people can be in a place where they're valued and nurtured, so that they're not susceptible? I mean, you know,
they still have to take responsibility. Society still demands that they take responsibility for their actions, whether they have parents or no parents.
And it's not necessarily the case where they've learned how to be accountable for their actions. Yeah. Somebody has to teach them that. They have to learn it somewhere along the way. Kids yearn for guidance. They want structure.
They
And
will never tell you that.
No, they won't. No, that's true. That's
But
true.
at the same time, as an adult, whether you're a parent, a man in the community that really just cares about kids, at some point somebody has to stop and listen to the child. Because you learn more about how I can really help you and work with you and deal with you if I'm hearing what you're really dealing with. You can't, as an adult, always just want to impart, this is the way you do it, go to school, do this. I found out as an educator working in juvenile hall, oh, I'm going to bring in all this schoolwork and improve these kids academically. They hated it. Then I said, you know, gentlemen, we're going to do these activities going to help your personal development. It was the same material. They did it. I came at them in a total different way. Education is why they were getting in trouble, cutting class, not going to school. But by listening to them and understanding, okay, they don't like school. So if I come in and say something they don't like, they're going to shut me off too.
Well, I'll tell you that I believe there's a project in Rancho Cordova, works with young boys that were not succeeding in school, and exclusively African American young boys. And this program was run by by staff from the sheriff's office. Two things, marginalized young boys participating in a program run by sheriffs. And I was thinking, how does this work? Went there and I saw an incredible thing. I saw boys that were getting ready to graduate from high school that were competing for GPA. See, nobody says that about young African American boys. The OK program did that. They would take these boys when they were failing 5th and 6th grade and invite them to Saturday school. And then they would work with the teachers and get the kids' homework a week ahead of time. On that Saturday school, they would work on the homework for the week to come. These boys were showing up for school on Monday, many times the first time in their life, ahead of their classmates. And that building on success, that simple reframe of something that was happening, I was thought to myself, why don't they do this for all children that are behind? And so the motivation to go and show that you're ahead is much better than showing up and being told you're so far behind, we really don't.
We really don't.
Yeah, we don't want you here. And so that simple format of a program working with kids that you described has profoundly changed the life of those kids.
I have to keep my promise, Tiambe.
A couple of things. Obama's program initiative is at www.fatherhood.gov.
Yes.
And they have all kind of programs there. So anybody in the audience out there can dial into there. I want to say a couple things. One, we need mothers and fathers, preferably biological. That's the highest level, and we can go down from there, to accept the love that they've given to each other in the form of a child, a human being. We need that's number one. We need to teach that in whichever way to make that work again. So we're having a program on Sunday, and it's called Black Men and Fathers, We Love You Dearly. Your mother needs you. Your children need you. Your community needs you. And again, what we're doing, we're having a thank you dinner, and then we're going to ask for contracts to do some things that we need to be done in our community to correct and to solve. And the issue is, yes, we do have some, we have to acknowledge, the reality. We have some that need assistance. We need encouragement. The fathers need encouragement. They can, low-income fathers cannot. Fathers can provide. So we need to let them know, like you said, that children just need your love. Yeah. They need you to show up. They need you to be there. Right. They need for you to know that you love them. So that's basically what we're going to talk about. And we want to thank the fathers. And we've been just doing it for about a month. And I found so many men, young men and older men, who have been great fathers. And so we want to highlight them. That's right. And the other young men, we have to teach accountability, but we want to let them know that we're there to support them. And just one more thing. And what we're going to do in December is near the New Year, it's going to be at Kwanzaa, but we're trying to get it all over the city, is a redemption, a reconciliation. Because fathers get hurt when children reject them, or women reject them, mothers reject them, and opposite. you know, because sometimes mothers have left. You know, there's one more thing, and that is I want you to remember that a lot of these young fathers are children, they're 80s babies. They're children of the crack epidemic that happened in our community when the drugs were dispersed in our community. So they're a whole different way. While we're talking, they don't understand. Thank you. My name is Tiambe Jama,
thank
the
you
Moms Organization.
for sharing what you're doing in that respect.
Yes.
And maybe you could hook up with the Fatherhood Collaborative. And we'll just keep track on what's going on, because certainly there need to be more programs dealing with fathers and young men as fathers to become fathers.
I think that I can only speak to what's going on in California, is that, you know, I've known the Fatherhood Collaborative here in San Mateo has been doing the work here locally. But I also know there's other communities that are, you know, working and toiling and trying to getting their community in order, just like you are in your community. And I think it's getting to the point now where we need to be working collectively and building on this so that the voice is unified, so that we're no longer asking the question is, are there more of those fathers than these fathers? Right. And we should be saying we expect all fathers to be stepping up and contributing to the well-being of their children, to those families, to the community as well. I think we've come out of the darkness, you know, where, you know, the father has been, you know, quietly doing his job, and now we require to do what the media does, is we need to begin to highlight these families that have successfully reintegrated, the fathers that aren't maybe in the home, that are still playing the role of fathers and doing an admirable job because maybe the relationship didn't succeed, but their role as fathers will always be there. And then the fathers that have been toiling and doing it and struggling and doing well and maybe never struggled, and bringing that to do it. I mean, that's why, you know, that's why we need to get together. Otherwise, we'll get a warped sense of what fatherhood looks like. And yes, there will be fathers that struggle, but they may struggle less if they're around fathers that have figured a little clues.
Well, I think everybody wants to be part of a winning team.
Yeah.
The Father Collaborative is trying to make sure that fathers recognize that being an accountable father, being an involved father, being a man that's willing to give your time to kids in the community is being a part of that winning team and being a success. And you being there is what sets the example for these young kids coming up, especially young boys, to recognize, first of all, you're a human being. And second, you're a man. So it's okay if, like I said, if you show emotions, if you want to have a family, that if you're in a situation where your wife makes more money than you, but hey, it's okay. This is the way society is. But the thing is how are you two working together to make a life for each other that in the end is going to benefit this family?
Do you know, I could very well ask you in terms of the traditions, how they might have affected you, but what I'm gathering from our conversation, and I'm realizing more and more that those traditions in a way are breaking down. I mean, those traditional concepts of what a woman is and how a woman behaves and what a man is and how the man behaves. And so we're in a time of flux. Now, you said we're coming out of the darkness. Some people would say the darkness was the light and now we're falling into the darkness. I mean, the whole society is changing.
Well, if you think of things in a rigid way, then you're going to struggle. You know, there are fathers out there that you know, my wife's father watched me change my son's diaper, and he came up and he sat next to me, and he was watching me, and he said, "I never changed a diaper." This was a new concept for him. And you know, and
did he criticize you?
No,
did he say, "That's not manly.
No. It was
real
not.
men
no.
don't change diapers."
No.
It's the opposite. Real men do change diapers.
I think he respected me sufficiently so that it wasn't like that. It was. I think he reflected and thought, "Why didn't I do this?" And you know, and I was very honest. I said, you know, because of the way Diego was nurtured in the first year and a half of his life, I never had to give him a bottle. It was the only time that I got to look at him in the eyes.
What did you get out of changing his diaper?
I learned to distinguish his cries of when he was wet or when he was soiled. I learned that was a different cry than when he was hungry. And if I could distinguish those two things, than I knew how to solve the little problem that he had as an infant. And you only know that by being present.
You could have just given him to his mother.
Nah, that's too easy.
Yeah, I don't know, but I you know, yeah.
But
And,
you
know,
miss out when you do that.
Yeah,
right?
you know, I don't know what she would have preferred. I mean, it's I don't want to glorify it. It's just a task, but it's a task that taught me more about being a father than just changing the diaper.
Now, I should not get to you to say, now, did you had 2 sons. You wanted 2 sons.
Yes, yes, had 2. I love changing the diapers, but I mean, for me, it started from the very beginning of the pregnancy. I went to all the doctor's appointments, went to Lamaze. I learned more in Lamaze about how to get ready for this process than anything I went through. And I encourage all men to go. I remember cringing when they said the woman's hip would detach. I was like, whoa, I never heard that all my school year. You know, but it really, you know what it did? It made me get so connected to my wife and what she was getting ready to go through physically. And it allowed me to take control and impart on what I could in that process to when I remember telling her in the 8th month, I said, you know what? I think it's just you and the Lord now because nothing I'm saying to you is working anymore. But I was at every delivery. She had 2 cesareans. And I remember the doctor saying, well, Mr. Collins, you're going to have to wait out here. I said, no, you got to get me one of those white jumpsuits. I'm going to be next to my wife when you deliver this child.
And you promised not to faint.
Didn't faint. I joked the whole time. Wife, I thought your insides looked like that. I joked the whole time because I wanted to look back on this experience and say, look what we went through together. When that kid walks through that graduation stage, I want to say, we did this together. And I want the kids to be able to hear the stories about one of the most famous stories in my family that they love for me to tell is when the one child was born vaginally. With my deep voice, I just rattled the whole hospital yelling, push, Pootie, push. I mean, everybody in the hospital, when I walked out, he's push, Pootie, push. You know, because that was important to me, to be there and see that child come out and for us to hold it together.
And I'm going to add one thing, is that is the narrative of that boy's life, that there was somebody there every step of the way that says, this is why we expect so much from you.
Well, I'd like to thank you. We're going to end with this idea of push.
Push, Pootie,
You know,
push.
and I'll give a plug out to the October 15th Dad's Count breakfast that's going to be held in Burlingame at the Crown Plaza.
Well, thank you so much for saying that. There are lots of, it seems, supports out there for fathers, and I'm very happy to have had the 2 of you to talk about those supports and give us a whole new concept of fatherhood. I'd like to thank my guests, and I'd like to thank you, the viewers, for watching. Until next time.